about what the pitfalls are, what gets in the way of you disciplining your child or your children, trying to find ways to subvert that and becoming increasingly comfortable. Put yourself in that position. So if you're the wife and the husband disciplines, put yourself in a position where you have the discipline and have your husband give you feedback or vice versa. If you're the wife and your husband is the one who's warm and you tend to be not as warm and fuzzy, then practice. This may sound silly, but it's actually how you change your behavior. You have to actually do it very overtly. So be aware of what you're doing and then take some real steps towards change.
You mentioned for showing warmth and everything. It's very I'm talking about. I have a 2-year-old now. For a 2-year-old, showing the warmth and everything is very easy. But when you're saying for discipline or putting a limits and all that, how do you communicate for a kid who cannot communicate? So if you tell them, you cannot express that this is what you want them to do. So for a small kid who can't talk, how do you set a boundary or let them understand that this is wrong and this is the consequence or whatever?
So the question is that for very young children, like for example a 2-year-old, it's easy to provide the warmth, the love. They're cute, cuddly, but it's harder to provide sometimes the discipline or to know how to provide that discipline. Right? So the thing with parenting is we're constantly challenged because our kids don't stay static; they grow and they develop. 2-year-olds have less cognitive capacity, less ability to think through problems and problem solve than do older children. So first and foremost, you have to be keenly aware of your child's developmental level. So you're not going to reason with that 2-year-old and say, this is not what you need to do because then this is going to happen and then that will happen and then, et cetera, et cetera.
He was like, if the kid can understand, like the language, like the kid doesn't speak, so how would you make them understand that that's what you're trying to say?
Right, so I think a lot of what we need to do is link their action with the reaction. Right? So for example, for very young kids, and a 2-year-old is really quite young, if they do an inappropriate behavior, you might say to them, time out, put it on time out for 1 or 2 minutes maximum. They're really young. And you have to be thoughtful about what behaviors you're going to address, what behaviors you're going to ignore, because you understand that's your child. Remember I said about temperament and acceptance. Our kids are not mini adults, and nor are they sort of copies of us either. So some of it comes from knowing. So you might have a very active 2-year-old, for example. So knowing that's part of the child's MO, providing some appropriate limits, monitoring, supervising, and then maybe making sure you've got a free space that's clear so the child can get into less trouble. So a lot of it is also sort of thinking ahead of time, so you can anticipate and not just put it on the child who may have less control. And there's a lot of details about how you respond, how you put children in timeout, how you deal with them, especially as they get a little bit older. And we can talk about that on the side as well.
I guess we'll do close at the same time. Can you please repeat the name and source of the article you mentioned at the conclusion? Another question is, my son is 2.5, my daughter is 1.5, and basically one abuses the other, which is quite normal. What steps should I take to stop this behavior?
Okay, so this is a common dilemma that parents face, and there are a couple of things that can get involved. There may be a pattern of bullying behavior from the older to the younger, and you don't want that obviously to persist for a number of reasons. You also want to empower the younger one to be able to appropriately respond and to protect themselves. So one of the things to think about is, again, anticipating when this happens. And trying to really look for the triggers to this behavior. Parents often tell us that behavior comes out of the blue, but usually it doesn't. Especially when it's children this young, there are often triggers, there are often frustrations. So while that 2.5-year-old may be targeting the 1.5-year-old, you also want to ask, again, this isn't blaming the victim, this is just looking at the whole analysis of the scenario, is what is the 1.5 doing, or what behavior is the 1.5 engaging in that leads to this from the 2.5-year-old? Are they just sitting there quietly, or are they doing something that's knowingly or unknowingly provoking the 2.5-year-olds? So I think anticipating and responding, again, in a kind but firm way, separating the children when you have to. For example, if the kids are in a car, making sure that they're not so close to each other that they can be physically sparring while you're trying to drive, which is not the best way to be on the road. And really figuring out what makes each one tick, what sets them off, what are the frustrations, and again, finding appropriate ways to discipline and teach them, help the older one to solve problems, deal with frustrations, not only providing discipline, but teaching the 2.5-year-old to the extent possible, again, quite young, on maybe coming and getting mama or baba, right, when the 1.5-year-old may be instigating or whatever it is, or just teaching them how to tolerate some of the things that are happening, again, hard for 2.5-year-olds. So it requires a lot of dissection. It requires looking at both the kids, what they're doing, the patterns, the triggers, and measuring your response. So 2.5 and 1.5-year-olds require a lot more gentle discipline and punishment than obviously a 7 or 9-year-old engaging in that very same behavior, because it's likely behavior that's been reinforced and repetitive and established a firm pattern. I don't know if it quite addresses what you're asking, but without more specifics, I think that's the best I can do.
The name of the reference.
I have about 20 copies, so the person who's interested should definitely get a copy, inshallah. It's the protective effects of good parenting on adolescents, and it's in current opinions in pediatrics from 2005. So that's the article. And again, I have several copies here.
We will take 2 more questions, one from the audience and one. Jannah, I can take.
When you see that your child has a relationship with someone who is having a negative impact on the child, what's the most effective way of either separating that relationship without causing resentment from the child?
So the question is, when you're seeing a negative influence or relationship developing, so your child is developing a relationship with a peer or another figure that you're concerned about, how should you respond? I think there are 2 strategies that you want to use, and I think one is probably going to be more successful. I think the one strategy that you seriously want to employ is strengthening your ties with your child. So, and that will have a natural consequence. So, if you see your child engaging more with this peer, build in more activities that you, in fact, are doing with your son or daughter. So, in fact, that does 2 things. It strengthens your bond and the relationship that you have. It opens up time that you'll have to talk about all kinds of topics, including this relationship that you're concerned about. So you can find more opportunities to discuss it in a natural way and talk about what about the relationship concerns you. So that's one. A natural side effect is that the more time the child will be spending with you, the less time, of course, you're going to be having with this negative influence. And you can be very strategic, about how you do this. That's your job as a parent. Sometimes you're going to do things in a very planful way that the child may not, and they don't need to know this. So my dad's increased that amount of time he spends with me by an hour and a half every day because he wants me to spend less time with that other kid. So they don't need to be aware that you're strategizing, but you have to strategize as a parent. The other thing is, of course, you can express very clearly to your child the concerns that you have. Be careful not to malign that individual, because that may not be the best way to actually decrease the behavior. What you really want to talk about is the characteristics or the whatever it is that child may be doing that you're concerned about, and why. Right? And again, as much as you can, keep it non-hostile, non-threatening, because the child will be much more responsive to that kind of approach. Kind of a gentle but firm sort of expression of what you want the child to do, the decision you'd like to see them make, will be much more effective. Of course, if they disregard that, you may have to take more firm steps and then start setting limits. I mean, that's hopefully the last step where you actually say, I don't want to be spending time with this person. I don't want you to be hanging out. You're forbidden from spending time with them. Hopefully, those are things that you have to resort to, either if they are a very serious negative influence, and I hope that none of our children, inshallah, have that encounter, that scenario, or that too long of time has elapsed, and that has really grown in terms of the strength of that relationship. So the more Cool.